Joining us live is the Labor Senator Katy Gallagher. Katy, good to see you. Thanks for your time as always. Let's start there. A short time ago when I asked David Littleproud about that federal ICAC, he said, well, the problem is that Labor is the one holding it up by not supporting it.
Morning, Pete. Yeah, I just heard that grab that you ran there in that package. It's just astonishing that this is now Labor's fault that the government hasn't done its job. Look, it promised an anti-corruption commission 1,079 days ago, and they haven't delivered upon it. I think it's a bit rich now to start, 3 years on, blaming the opposition. It's their job. They haven't done it, and they haven't introduced the legislation. That's as simple as that.
From what you've seen, just to go back over some old ground here, the proposal from the government, is that something that Labor supports anyway?
Look, when we saw the last, I think there was an exposure draft, it had some big gaps in it. Things like, wasn't allowed to have public hearings. I don't think it could do its own referrals. It was certainly a much weaker body that they were proposing in that draft than we had thought was a good idea and that we'd proposed. So there were certainly gaps that we thought needed to be addressed. But the short story is, Pete, the government has not brought that bill forward. They have no intention of doing it, and partly because I think they're so riddled by all their own scandals and failures on integrity that it would be a problem for them if there actually was an anti-corruption body in existence in this country nationally. So I don't think it's any surprise they haven't acted upon it, but to blame Labor, I guess, is just a new low.
Liberal Bridget Archer, she's threatening to cross the floor because religious freedoms and the bill there is being prioritised over the federal ICAC bill. Do you think it is?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's clear the Religious Freedom Bill and the Anti-Integrity and the Anti-Corruption Commission were two promises prior to the last election by Scott Morrison that he would deal with. He's like 5 minutes to midnight. I haven't got across the religious discrimination bill fully since it's been released a day ago, but we've got that being brought in at 5 minutes to midnight. He hasn't worked with anyone in terms of putting that bill together, and he hasn't brought in an anti-corruption commission. So, these are two clear promises that he has failed to deliver upon, and the government is falling apart, Pete. Like right before our eyes, we've got senators splitting, we've got them voting on different ways, paired, not turning up in the chamber, and now we've got the House with members of the government in the House starting on the same strategy. It really is, a government that is unable to govern at the moment.
When it comes to the religious discrimination bill, and I know you mentioned there that you only caught some of the finer details yesterday, but is Labor inclined to back it based on what you've seen so far?
Well, we'll work through our processes, Pete. We certainly support protection from discrimination, and, on the grounds of faith is absolutely a legitimate area to have protections in place. But we want to work through it. We'll consult with the community once they've had the time to go across it. I understand that it'll be referred to a Senate committee, so we'll have that process to go through. But it's clear that I would be very surprised if this is dealt with prior to the election, and maybe it's part of what the Prime Minister wanted was that we were sort of discussing, and people will have different views on this, that he knows that during an election campaign. Maybe that suits his political strategy, but it's certainly something that we will take the time to work through. We're not opposed to it in principle, but we want to make sure that that other people's protections don't necessarily come at the cost of other rights for other groups. And that's, I think, that fine balance that needs to be reached.
Right. Are you referring there to the protections for gay students and teachers and whether enough are in place?
Well, I think that's certainly come up in the past, and I note in the media in the last day or so we've seen groups coming out worried about that, and indeed members of the government, their own people who are raising concerns about that now. So I don't think it's something, it's not an issue that doesn't have to be examined and worked through, and that's what we will do. But certainly at an in principle level, we would be supportive of a bill that provides protection to people based on faith, but we have to work through the detail.